The third episode of Turn A Gundam is the one that by far most resembles the first episode of Mobile Suit Gundam, which is interesting because the first episode of Mobile Suit Gundam had always felt kind of rushed in a sense to me. We don't really get to like Amuro or Frau Bo before they start enduring all of this chaos and destruction. And while I can appreciate as an adult the thematic stuff, the tactics, and how intriguing the world is in and of itself, and I'm less focused on trying to project onto the characters, when I was younger, when I was actually closer to Amuro's age, this was what made Gundam difficult for me, is that I did not connect to Amuro at all. But when I found Turn A Gundam, I think I was only probably 18, maybe 19. I still wasn't into sci-fi, into plot-driven anime, or into Gundam, but checking this show out, I did connect to Loran. I did connect to the setting because of the fact that it's a little bit closer to my own reality. And so I cared about these characters a little bit more by the time the action got rolling. And it's not that I think that this episode is like a lot more emotional than the original first episode of Gundam, just because it almost feels like it's downplaying some of its dramatic moments. Like, it does not try to really wring emotions out of you as a viewer as much as it does try to make you reflect on the sort of inevitability of what's going on and how serious the consequences are. Where when you're watching the first episode and a half, there's a lot of suggestion, like I said before, of an impending sort of violence and doom, but the reality of it is so much heavier than what the tone would set you up for, and that is the reality of war. People are standing around on a sunny, peaceful day making plans about a day that's going to end in tremendous violence and destruction and resetting the lives of everyone involved, essentially. And we get a lot of that in this episode, and because of the fact that we've already established the characters in the world, there's actually even more room to just create this elaborate tapestry of chaos in this episode, which is, I think, Tomino's not only specialty, but I'm going to call it his obsession, particularly when it comes to the Gundam series. If there's anything that Gundam explores without fail, it is the chaos specifically of war. And a lot of war films depict chaos. They show you a scenario where people are running around, things are exploding, but usually it just looks like a frenzy of noise, and it's hard to really get a sense of why things are so chaotic. Gundam really goes out of its way, Tomino goes out of his way, to make sure that he's clarifying why all of this chaos is happening. Now, if you want to see it handled the least coherently ever, go watch Garzy's Wing, which came out just a couple of years before Turn A Gundam, and uses a lot of the same ideas, but just handles them way worse because there's so little explanation of what's going on. And at the same time, it is trying to explain. It's just happening at the explanations and the things happening are happening at the same time. And it's very confusing because they're like one sentence explanations that just lead to more questions. And it's such a head fuck to watch Garzy's Wing, especially in the English dub, which is uniquely terrible, that I highly recommend it. It is one of my favorite anime experiences, and there is something fascinating to me about having been a Garzy's Wing. I'm going to call myself a Garzy's Wing superfan because I have watched the first episode like more than a dozen times and shown it to many people. And so re-experiencing so many of the tropes that OVA is using in the first 3 episodes of Turn A Gundam, it's like, this is what that was supposed to be. This is the good Garzy's Wing. It's got the old tech versus new tech as the central theme of the battle. It's differently lopsided, but it is actually a more complex version of the same idea. You've got the hero running around naked, discovering a secret weapon that basically turns the tide of a losing battle right at the start of the show, and therefore creates the idea that there is any competition between the two sides when one of them is tremendously overpowered without him. I think Tomino is just on certain ideas during this period that he was re-exploring again and again, and I kind of am inclined to look at it like Garzy's Wing being just this abject failure probably put him in a pretty bad mood Maybe he was humbled to his own lack of ability to create something original that would pop off without using the familiar IP. I'm sure he thought that he was going to be able to just go off and do it on his own with hookers and blackjack. In fact, forget came back to Sunrise and he made a legendary Gundam show, even if it isn't, once again, like a cash cow. And he would come back again to make Gundam G-Reco, which was actually even kind of less of a success than Turn A Gundam. I'm definitely going to be curious to check that show out again after I finish Turn A Gundam. I don't know if I'll talk about it in videos, but I will definitely give it another go because I never finished it, but that show is fascinating. Before I totally jump into analyzing this episode, I want to respond to some comments and do a little bit of housekeeping, talk about some things that y'all brought to my attention, and also give a shout out to the first round of memberships. I was not expecting to get this many signups so quickly. It's $2 a month, and you get access to each episode of this a week early. So the members will be hearing this on November 13th. The rest of the world will hear it on November 20th, unless they have already created a membership in the time between then. This is the first video that I'm recording after having already put out episodes 1 and 2. So shout out to Crystalline Fos, Never Knows Best, Naomix, Duncan264, Green, and Forte, who all signed up as members right away. Y'all are amazing. Shouts out to fellow anime YouTuber Mercury Falcon, who reached out to me to put me on to some other resources and people who have talked about Turn A Gundam, especially Turn A Feezy, a WordPress blog. I'll just link it in the description if you want to go in depth on someone else's intense research into Turn A Gundam. I'm relatively new to this specific anime. Like, I'm doing this series to explore the anime. I've seen 30-something episodes of it, like, almost 15 years ago. So this is me coming into it from the perspective of I'm analyzing it as it happens to me, and I want it to be very participatory in a crowd sense where we're all kind of either newcomers or people with more information. I'm not going to spoil anything. If people are just like laying down spoilers in the discussion or whatever, I would discourage that, but I want it to be something where people who have never seen the show can basically experience it in real time through watching these videos. But I also don't want to be wrong about anything I'm saying. For instance, in the first episode, I had used a phrasing that Hiroyuki Hoshiyama was the creator of Dogram, because he was the lead writer on that, similarly to how he was on Gundam, but he didn't create Gundam. He also did not create Dogram. That was created by a guy called Ryosuke Takahashi. That guy created a bunch of other major giant robot anime in the 80s. Hoshiyama wrote on a bunch of other legendary shows in the 80s, and Mercury Falcon told me that the level of input anime screenwriters had on the story of anime that they worked on during the Showa era is questionable, with some even saying that all they ever wrote was dialogue, and even that was influenced by the directors of the shows. So I don't want to overcredit a screenwriter, although I also think, obviously, if that guy was a screenwriter on a bunch of the most legendary anime, it must mean he was at least pretty easy to work with and a good guy to have around for that stuff. But shout out Ryosuke Takahashi, just because I did not know that name, and Mercury Falcon put me on. So if you're like a hardcore mecha fan, you now know about what level I'm on. Mercury Falcon told me that Turn A is also interesting because of the fact that it came out just a year after Brain Powered, which is arguably Tomino's most nihilistic work. Brain Powered drew from the depression of Japan's lost generation. The economy was in shambles, the Hanshin earthquake devastated Kobe, the government hardly rendered aid, and the Aum attacks made people lose faith in society, and Tomino channeled all of that into Brain Powered, and then following up with Turn A is like a light of hope at the end of the tunnel. I thought that was a really interesting point, especially I haven't seen any of Brain Powered. PS3 Wizard described Loran as the canary in the coal mine of what Gundam protagonists were going to become in the future. I think in many ways Loran might be the result of the popularity of Gundam Wing, though, because Gundam Wing was the B-shonen. Not all of the characters are on the girlier side, but Loran is not really that much more effeminate than, I think his name was Quattro, the one with the bowl cut from that show. And in many ways, Loran is more effeminate than future Gundam protagonists. Also, if we go all the way back to Camille, I mean, Camille's whole thing was that he has a girl's name and he's really upset about it. I guess I wouldn't call him effeminate, although he has long hair and a girl's name. He's really upset if you call that girly, but I don't know. There's definitely been this aspect of, like, what if the Gundam protagonist was, like, kind of an effeminate guy from as early as Zeta Gundam. Evil Rhoda pointed out that the pop-out seat on the car is actually called a rumble seat, and they've been on cars for a really long time. He said, I remember seeing them on antique cars when I was a kid because I used to go to a local car show that included a lot of old vehicles. A quick Google shows one on the Ford Model A way back in 1930-ish, but they were apparently also on horse-drawn coaches before that. Also, he theorizes that the Gundam was not encased in rock naturally, but covered with concrete or something to preserve it, kind of like the glass record from Dr. Stone. Interesting theory. Crusher Mach 3263 also pointed out that the rumble seats were a thing until about the late 30s. So it's actually more time appropriate than even what I was suggesting. Yeah, I obviously don't know much about car history. And they also pointed out that there's a moment where I said there were 4 identical guns on the wall, which I had thought when I had recorded that. But then when I was editing the video, I noticed they are actually 4 subtly different guns. Maybe not subtly different in their functions, just the way that they look on screen at that moment. But goddamn, the level of detail in this show is staggering. Like, if something's on screen, it is always bespoke, which I truly appreciate. A couple other people also said that they wanted to do episode-by-episode analysis of Turn A Gundam, kind of suggested that this would dissuade them from doing that, and I'd like to re-encourage you towards it. If you have anything unique to say compared to what I'm saying, even if you're only doing like a 5-minute video that just fills in the blanks of stuff I didn't already say, like, we can ride the algorithm together. It literally helps all of us. If people were to click from my video onto your video and keep watching Turn A Gundam videos, it would create an algorithmic spike in Turn A Gundam that would feed it to more people and literally make the show more popular. I literally did this with Revolutionary Girl Utena during the blogging days. Like, I created a group blog of Utena that made that show tremendously more popular with anime bloggers than it had been before. So if you want Turn A Gundam to become a more popular anime, like a more beloved cult favorite with more of a fan base, more fan art surrounding it, more culture surrounding it, please make your own Turn A Gundam analysis series. Inu Pablo said, I would encourage not throwing out reading into the racial dynamics because of the supposedly post-racial world, because the show is about how the relics of the past influence the present, or our present influences the future in the context of the show. Tomino and company didn't give the lead of their skin dark skin in 1999 to have you not think about it. There's a lot of detail you can pick up in Turn A by paying attention to where they placed their darker skin characters and the relationships they have with other characters. The relationships between the darker skin characters in particular is very interesting. Like, I think when I wrote that part, I wasn't really thinking about the fact that the servants were, like, literally living and working underneath of this, like, family of what are portrayed as all white people. Although, I don't know, Sochie looks like she could be mixed or something, but her parents both look white, and her sister looks supremely white. And Diana is a blonde white lady who's the queen of the Moonrace people. There is, like, Gwyn is a little bit darker skinned, and he's like the inheritor of the lands on Earth, but it could be that this is part of why he connects with Loran. I don't know. There's a lot that definitely can be explored. I don't want to start saying anything about it until I am a little more sure of where the show is going. Like, I don't want to say anything overarchingly and then be proven wrong in a later episode, but it definitely is doing something. I just haven't caught what it is yet. One more thing, people who are still confused about who I am or what this channel is, I'm Nova. I am part of a system, a dissociative identity system. You can look into what that means if you really need to. Trixie the Golden Witch is another identity that I use for internet creation, but is distinct from me in ways that probably wouldn't matter to most of you. But that's why I talk in this low-ass voice. This is Nova's voice. This is not Trixie's voice. I can't tell the difference. Well, that's fine. I'm going to be reading a lot more from the notes I took on this episode than I did even in the last one, because this is a very straightforward episode. Again, it's mostly just a demonstration of chaos. We've set up all the parameters for a chaotic situation. Let's see what happens when we hit the starting gun. And of course, that happened at the end of the previous episode. Actually, there was a sort of a starting volley, we'll say, between the Wadom, we're going to learn that's the name of the big-legged mech, and the Turn A Gundam. But Turn A melted its laser, and its pilot is still trying to figure out how to control it, whereas the Wadom has retreated back in the direction of the castle city of Gnosis. Episode 3 literally picks up with the exact same image that Episode 2 ended on, and then kind of pans over and continues that moment. That is after like a very brief recap of the previous episode where Loran is doing the voiceover. And I'm going to talk in this episode a bit more about Loran's voice actress, Romy Park. I'm a huge fan. I became a fan because she not only voiced Loran in this show, but also Edward Elric in Full Metal Alchemist. Generally, she's one of the best at doing androgynous voices. She's a woman who can play a boy convincingly, and as somebody who myself is a woman with a deep voice, I always appreciate representation of women who are capable of accessing that kind of range and, willing, I guess, to play someone of the other gender. And Romy Park's done it a whole bunch of times to excellent effect. She also is a great villain voice. She was like the evil demon lady in Samurai Sentai Shinkenger, and I thought she was really fun in that too. It's been a while since I watched something with Romy Park, so my references are very dated, but I actually got to see her at Otakon one year, and she was just magnificent. It was one of those like, I'm just a fan. I'm absolutely a fan of this person. So I think this episode, there are moments where she really lends inflection to the way that Loran says certain things that I think change the way you'll look at what those lines mean. And I'm going to notate that particularly just in this opening scene where he's kind of like annoyed with Sochie, but also concerned in the same way that she is. And so he's bouncing between, he's not really saying anything emotional, but the emotions of how he says what he says gives a little bit more depth to it. And I think that only a performance from a consummate professional can make that possible. So we start off, Sochie has a clear view from the cockpit of the mecha, which is up on the mountainside, of the fires from Gnosis and vicinity. And she asks if the white dolls started those fires. Loran's like, no. He's saying it like he's talking to a child. He's just like, of course not. He's not breaking concentration. He's just trying to figure out how to commandeer this goddamn robot out of autopilot mode. Sochie is like, the fires came from the tube, which looks like a big gun, right? Because she doesn't know what a laser is. And then she's like, I wonder if the festival goers got away safely. And Loran's just like, they did. And this time, whereas before he sounded a little more annoyed, now he sounds determined and hopeful. This is what I mean about the voice lending a lot to how this comes off when he's saying yeah, they got away. Whereas he sounded like, shut up, I'm taking care of something before, and now he's a little bit more like, no, I also am reassuring myself because I want that to be true. Is it true? He has no idea. He just wants it to be, and also is still trying to concentrate on what he thinks needs to be done right now. Sochie finally asks, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm trying to drive the robot. She's like, it doesn't even have a steering wheel or levers. And then it finally occurs to her suddenly that they are 20 or 30 meters up. And Loran's just like, yeah. And then she's like, why are you naked? And he answers as though he is confused about why she wouldn't know, considering that she was the one who told him to disrobe to apply the stigmata. And this scene really reads to me like an addition to the script to remind the viewer why Loran is naked, just in case the little opening bit didn't make it clear enough. It would have been better, I think, if Sochie had asked, why didn't you put clothes on? Because she should have known why he was naked. She told him to disrobe during the festival. She should have said, why didn't you put on clothes? And then he could be like, I was, trying to get, I don't know, I just ran into the mecha. I wasn't worried about that, basically. Sochie was the one who would have prioritized robing herself. But just, it creates a little bit of oddness in this interaction, but it's funny because the way that Romy plays the line is like, huh? You don't remember? Also, if she had pointed out that he could have dressed himself, then there's an opportunity that he could have been like embarrassed about not having thought about it, or he could have been like, well, it's embarrassing that you thought about it when there were bigger fish to fry. I don't know. There's multiple ways you could have taken it. Anyway, Loran finds a switch which makes the cockpit hang down like a ball sack all the way to the floor, suspended by wires. Sochie clings to Loran, and the imagery to me of her in his lap really reads very Macross. Like, if you've never seen Macross, it adds both comedy and romance into the very serious war robot genre in a way that, like, Mobile Suit Gundam has subplots of romance in the sense that it demonstrates characters having romantic feelings. It doesn't feel romantic. It doesn't have moments that give romance. Whereas the Macross franchise like deliberately injects that into Gundam as like, this is what we're doing uniquely from, the sci-fi shows like Gundam and Yamato and stuff that existed right before it. Is we're going to have this romance and this comedy, and the characters are all kind of slick talking, almost like in that Marvel kind of way where like everybody's a little bit sly. And Turn A isn't quite like that. It's not all the way like Macross. It still feels like a Tomino Gundam kind of show, but it does have a tinge of that. It has a little bit more of the let's put the girl in the guy's lap in the cockpit, but it's really doing that to subvert it. Like, it's doing that to set us up for disappointment within the same episode. Because if we're looking at a show like Macross, or for another example like Eureka 7 that also borrows a lot of that iconography from Macross and really goes hard on the romantic part, like, feels very romantic, or Gurren Lagann, these shows that borrowed that we're going to have the hero and he's got his cute girl and they're in the mecha together. In this show, it looks like that for a second. But then you realize that she has crushed his nuts. That Sochie, it doesn't seem to be her fault, but something is wrong. Loran's in pain, and it's because his nuts got crushed. And he says the goldfish fell on them, but he's just looking in pain and disgust back at the cockpit, saying, like, this thing has to have some kind of manual. And I find this especially funny because it's not just subversive in the moment, and like the music kind of sets you up that this isn't going to be romantic. Like, the music's kind of funny and like feels more cartoony. It feels like a comedy of errors type beat. And of course, where this episode is going later on, they're both going to slap each other and like really have like a kind of a trauma together moment that is not in any way cute. So yeah, this is almost like making fun of the idea of that the pilot would have like his cute little girlfriend in the seat with him. It's like, actually, this is like the obnoxious town girl who's kind of like, her dad is his boss. She treats him like she has command over him. She's barking in his ear the whole time that he's trying to get shit done. She's kind of annoying. She crushes his nuts, and later she's gonna slap the shit out of him. So, I'm just saying, this is like almost making fun of the idea of this being romantic. So as they're both searching the cockpit for the manual, Sochie realizes that something that looks like the marks of stigmata has been implanted into Loran's back. And she says, it's clear as day you have the stigmata, although there are actually 8 marks, and I believe that the stigmata was supposed to be 6. But Loran can't see them. He's trying to look over his shoulder and he can't, so he's just got Sochie telling him, you got the sacred marks. And she wonders if they were made by bumps in the seat, and he's like, I wonder if the seat is supposed to attach to a pilot suit. And then he notices that Sochie is leaving the robot and saying she's worried about the fires and wants to get him dressed. So we cut from there to these big conic radio receivers, which are getting sharp signals, and a faceless tech is saying that he's getting sounds from 3 or 4 different types, and the total number is unknown. So we're going to see like 3 or 4 different enemy ships in this episode. Some other red shirt mooks are putting on a searchlight, and then the mortar cannoneers fire at a silhouette spotted above. Their explosions leave undamaged the big-legged robot, the Wadom, that they're firing on, while named military mooks watch from binoculars and wonder what the hell that thing is. You've got a mustached and cleft-chinned guy in a cowboy hat who calls out to a Sergeant Yanni that the light which flashed across the sky just now must have been one of Guin's secret weapons. So they think that Guin has the Gundam on purpose. The aggressive-looking, patchy-bearded Sergeant Yanni agrees, concluding that Galleons would never come up with the idea of using airplanes for combat, which he's just totally not understanding what's going on here in any way, shape, or form. That guy gets on a phone and tells the gunners, "Here it comes, shoot that thing down that looks like a damn scarecrow," which they use that word a few times describing the Wadom. And then he commands his own turret battalion to fire on it, but they are ineffective as it lands on the city. Citizens scramble out of the streets as the robot clips power lines and it stomps on through. Underneath the moon, we see some larger battleships looming in the sky. There's some old dork with glasses and a bowl cut who asks an off-screen Lieutenant Phil if he has a fix on the beam that was fired from the vicinity area, while another guy shouts that they're taking anti-aircraft fire in the background and that the searchlights are causing them to misidentify targets. So again, just chaos. At the same time that someone mentions how this is a perfect job for the Wadom's abilities, another dude comments how a Wadom doesn't even carry a beam with as much range as the beam that was fired. So many people making so many assumptions going around. Like, everyone wants that beam to be on their team, but the guys who are in the know are like, no, dude, that can't be us, and like, it really can't be either team because nobody knew this thing was possible until this moment. But they're all freaking out trying to figure out what was that. The hip heavies, the green planes, are firing ineffectively on a Wadom which is nearby to Bastonia Castle, where they are scrambling everyone inside, and Kihel's mom can't find her because she's up in the comms room. In the comms room, Gwyn is shouting that this is an outright invasion, and he's receiving a response that the deadline expired a month ago and that he was told that in such an event they would return to Earth. He asks if the return has to involve destroying the local cities, and we kind of just cut away from that because obviously the response he must have gotten is, y'all fired first. They literally just landed and the militia started firing on them. It's the fact that he assumed that there was an invasion and started firing first that caused violence, but, the retaliation destroyed basically their entire city, so they're basically fucked. He just completely underestimated the moon race. He just did not know what was possible for them, and, fucked around and found out. This is the epitome of a fuck around and find out situation. This is what the moon people are telling him. You fucked around, you found out. And he's just like, but that's not fair. Something I didn't notice until watching this back after taking my notes so that I could get my screen caps is that there is this constant use of literal reframing where characters are looking at an event through a lens. So for instance, when the Wadom is falling from the sky into the city, we see it through binoculars, which then leads us into the people who are seeing it commenting on it. And then we cut back to the Wadom, but now we're seeing it in a puddle, and the perspective is that Frandal is trying to get a photo of it, but the searchlights aren't hitting it. And so she gets knocked over, and she actually can't get a lens on it. But the puddle was the unique lens through which we saw, that bridged the scenes. But it's basically just using a reflective surface or some kind of lens in order to show us how someone is seeing something else, but also using that as a way to go from the story of what they're seeing to the story of the person seeing it on a visual cinematic level. It's extremely clever as a way to keep the scene feeling dense, cutting between all these different people, but not making us lose a sense of placement of where they are relative to one another, which is super important for a war scene. The amount of establishing where things are relative to each other in these first 3 episodes is actually astounding. It's like a Miyazaki level of I understand exactly where everything is. And when I say a Miyazaki level, you can watch an old video I did called How Hayao Miyazaki Maps a Setting to understand what I mean. But Miyazaki uses visual language of characters moving from one side of a screen to another to let us know where things are relative to one another in the setting, and then we feel like we've been there. And in the case of Turn A, it's a little bit more frenetic, but through these first 3 episodes, we saw Loran get into the city from across this field, and then we saw shots that reestablished exactly what he had just done. And then we learn about how far apart Gnosis and Vicinity are, and then that starts becoming more and more relevant in this episode. And if we didn't know that stuff, it would be super hard to follow this fight. If you didn't know exactly how far Gnosis and Vicinity are from one another, if you didn't understand, but like, you learned all of that when, for instance, the Gundam fired the beam and missed the robot in Vicinity, and the beam went over Gnosis Castle a few seconds later. Like, that's the kind of visual language that lets you understand where it all is. But getting so much more experimental with that by putting us into binocular lens, and now we're on a rooftop, and then putting us in a puddle, and now we're at ground floor in a totally different part of the city, but we understand how each of those is relative to the Wadom. That's brilliant storyboarding. And where that leads us into is this scene of an evacuation where all these blimp airships have landed all over the city, but they can only collect, a handful of people each. And so you've got all these people scrambling to get aboard. They're pulling each other down. You got guys who are like clinging to the side of a ship as it's taking off. It's hundreds of feet in the air. You've got Keith, who's getting on board one of them, and he's calling out, "Your daughter's on board, sir," because he's trying to get his boss onto one of the leaving blimps. Pulled off of Keith by some other guy. Total crabs in a bucket situation, right? Because that guy's not now getting on the blimp. Like, I don't know if he thought he was going to climb the dude, but in his desperation, he just made it harder for that guy to get up by trying desperately to get up himself in a way that obviously wasn't going to work, and pulls them both down. It is the most perfect visual representation of the crabs in a bucket concept as applied to humanity imaginable. The boss made it on because Keith gets the boss onto the ship. So he's managed to rescue his boss. So you have Fran Dahl trying to get a photo of the Wadom with this old-timey camera on a tripod. She gets knocked over by the retreating crowds. And as the crabs in a bucket situation's happening, Keith is angrily wondering, like, did Diana Counter show up just to invade? Like, was this the plan? And in the cockpit of the Wadom, we've got the big lady. She's sucking down a futuristic Capri Sun and tossing it, complaining again about her intel, which had said that Earthers were soft and that they wouldn't resist. So this whole situation just was not expected at all. They really thought that they were just going to show up and, look tough, and the humans were going to say, "Oh, fuck, we're not dealing with this." The Earthers, rather. Meanwhile, the Earthers are firing on her from what she describes as toy airplanes. Then she finds their airstrip, and she's like, "Please tell me you're not going to attack. Please tell me you're not this stupid." And she just keeps getting angrier and angrier as they, attack. And so finally, she fires a laser. It tears through the planes, and it tears through a huge chunk of the city of Gnosis. And this is when the people in the castle realize that the light that just hit their city is the same light that they saw lighting up the sky in the direction of Vicinity. So they're like, "Oh, not only are we fucked, they're fucked. It's all fucked." So then a woman faints. This other guy is just haplessly catched onto her as this other guy is running off to inform Gween. Kihel re-enters the ballroom, and her mom finds her. And the rest of the party guests are all there, including this really cute girl in a pink dress. And Kihel tells her mother that it's a good thing that she wasn't outside and that she's got to get to Gween. I don't actually know how she got separated from him, but whatever. And then the party members are like, "Those pillars are moving," and it turns out it's the Wadom wading through the moat next to the castle, which is a really cool shot. By the way, this is Gate, but good. Remember Gate? I have this really old video talking about how bad Gate is. That's still my most popular video over on the Trixie the Golden Witch channel. And this is the exact same concept done well. This is what Gate should have been. Anyway, Kiel's mother faints, and the robot starts cutting these barrage balloons, as they're called, off of the ropes that are holding them down to the castle. So I guess those were probably just firing on it. Basically just disabling anything that's firing on it. Kiel tries to wake her mother as we cut from that scene to Sochie finally having found a shawl to throw onto Loran, who is still standing in the seat of the Gundam. As he fixes the shawl like a towel around his waist, Sochie asks if he has found anything out, and he says that he's got some basics down and also found something like an instruction manual on a tablet. He explains how it works to her, and it kind of looks like a Pokédex or a Palm Pilot or something, which, that's where we were in 1999 technology. And then he explains the concept of typing on a screen to her, and she's just dumbfounded at it, just like, I don't get it, moves right past it. It's just like, "Where'd you find it?" And he says it was in a survival kit underneath the seat. And she's like, oh, you've got good intuition. Now, interestingly, even though Loran has figured out that this is a tablet and that it has documents in it, he does not understand this technology. This is not something that they have on the moon. He can't even read the language inside of it. He doesn't get what it is. Sochie is wondering if there's somehow some kind of like thin paper or a film inside of it to let it display the words. And Loran's like, I don't know, but we should probably not take it apart. So then she asks him again if he's worried about the fires. And Loran reacts as if he had not noticed there were fires or that she had been telling him there were fires. Like he was so locked in trying to get the robot working that he's just like, fires? Like this is the first moment that he's been pulled far enough away from his determination to just find out how the thing works to even notice. So we got searchlights and mortars that are all targeting the Wadom robot in the middle of town, which it just releases a cluster of seeker missiles and takes them all out. Inside of the castle, everyone is fielding calls. They're telling people to stop shooting and start putting out fires. Don't blame us. We need to stay here on comms, stuff like that. Kihel is distributing tea around the room, and Gwyn thanks her, and he's just incredulous at the technology which has descended from the moon. And so she asks, did you see this coming? And he's like, well, this is just beyond human understanding, which is kind of like a way of saying that he was told that this would happen. He just didn't think it could be like this because it was so far out of his depth of what he thought was possible. He's being very dodgy about admitting that. You know, he's trying to be like, well, how could I have known? And it's like, maybe you just shouldn't have tested. But he also concludes that if this attacking force is from the same source that they've been negotiating with for the last 2 years, then at least Diana Soriel will definitely listen to reason. So he clearly had a certain level of faith that these people were not the type to attack before this all began. Loran and Sochie jump back into the cockpit, and they ascend, seemingly without noticing that the rock-hounding duo, Mr. Sid and his assistant, are inspecting it at that moment. And so they start asking who's piloting, and Loran is answering with his name, while Sochie is like, just ignore them, get into the fire, go to the fires. So this situation is just kind of maintaining the chaotic atmosphere of the episode. Like, this could have been a more simple exchange, but having Sochie shouting at Loran one thing and Sid and the assistants shouting another thing keeps up that kind of stress level of what's going on in the situation. It's a very Tomino thing to do. So Mr. Sid and the assistant are asking who's piloting. Loran tells Sid that he learned about him from Gwyn and also that the robot has controlled itself, and he tells Sochie that she's being extra for telling him to run into the fires. The assistant wonders if this is one of the machines that was written about in the Dark History, which Loran's like, what's the Dark History? Which we're not going to learn that in this episode, but we can surmise. And Sochie is just badgering him, and Sid's like, if you move the robot, at least go hide it in the valley where the Heim mine is, because if what's written about this in the Dark History is true, the enemy cannot know about this robot. And of course, we realize it's already too late. They're aware of it, but maybe they can hide it a little bit. And then Sochie sits on Loran's legs, which activates the pedal controls, moving the robot forward, knocking Sid and the assistant off their feet. And they're complaining while he's activating the balancers, and the lights in the robot eyes come on, and he starts getting it moving personably. But then Sid points out that there's buried mines all over this mountain, so of course the ground keeps collapsing under the robot's footsteps. Again, this is to me the magic of Gundam. It's just noticing every little weird thing that could go wrong and would go wrong if you weren't accounting for every possibility in the situation. When you're not thinking about the fact that there could be a giant robot fight in a place, that place is not prepared for a giant robot fight, and vice versa. So we get the eye catch, and with the robot having fallen over, Sochie just absconds from the cockpit and starts running towards home. And then Sid figures out who she is and what's going on, and the assistant's like, can we really just let them leave? And Sid's like, look, I'm more interested in investigating this. I know who they are. I can interrogate them later. So then he decides to call Gwyn, and he tells him that one of the clockwork figures that was spoken of in the Dark History has moved by itself. And as soon as Gwyn hears about them having unearthed a mechanical doll, he's like, oh, so we can unearth an infinite amount of them potentially. And this is, again, just so core to the problems of Gween's way of thinking. The problem of accelerationist thinking and expansionist thinking, of assuming that there is always a next stage and that next stage is always reachable. And that if you just increase certain parameters of, how fast you're working, then you'll get there quicker. And it's like, you really just don't understand where the actual limitations are, what is actually possible. And in this case, he's just decided, like, well, if unearthing a mechanical doll is possible, it must be possible to unearth an infinite plausible number of them. And it's like, or it could be that there's just one, and you'll never see another one as long as you live. Nobody found one in the last few hundred years that they've been excavating this mountain. Why would they not know about it already? But whatever. He's like, put everything on excavation, get the militia excavating the area, find another one. And Sid also points out, just in fascination, that the machine has a mustache, which Gween and Kihel are struggling to imagine. So we go back to Sergeant Yanni, who's being ordered to abandon his location with Cowboy Hat Guy, and he tells us the militia won't be taken down by some scarecrow-looking thing. In the skies above, aboard some imposing-looking battleships, a crew discusses the beam from the Gundam having come not from the Diana counter fleet. Bad Haircut finds the landing point of the flat that was sent 2 years ago and wonders if it might have been acquisitioned by the militia, but then it's pointed out to him that the beam was different. They don't have that beam. The Top Knot guy also says that Queen Diana had said to act peacefully, but that Earth is a big place, which is a cryptic turn of phrase, but basically implies that they had been told not to fight when they showed up, but they got there and they were fired on, so now it's a battle. So then Gween goes out on his balcony and he literally hollers up at the sky towards the hovering battleships, being like, are y'all trying to fight? Looks like you got machine guns, but you're not shooting. Like, what are you doing? Look, we've got one of the Dark History's machines. We uncovered it. He just shouts that into the sky. And Kehel's like, are you sure about this? And Gween's like, look, Sid's intel said that we could acquire vast numbers of space machines that could be used as weapons. Cap. I don't know if she's realizing it, but it's Cap. So then he lets her know that her sister and Laurent are piloting the Gundam, which he thinks is a good thing, but we cut right from that to them on foot, Laurent carrying Saucier on his back, just proving him wrong visually right away. Also, they're passing a memorial for infants. There was one of these in the first episode, too, when they were carrying the totem uphill, but I don't think it's the same one. I just think it's interesting how many labeled memorial for infants there are. So anyway, Lauren's carrying Saucier on his back, and he's like, why am I carrying you? Seriously, why? And she's like, well, I got sore feet from looking for clothes for you. And anyway, you're my driver, so of course it's your job to give me a lift home. And that is such a, like a class struggle kind of moment. Like, this girl thinks she owns him because he is her driver. It's not in the driver's job description to carry you. The job doesn't change and become a new job to fit the needs of your boss. But it also kind of does, because that is the reality of the social circumstances. It's a keep it funny kind of a situation. Laurent basically says, like, oh yeah, you're right, Massa, and just keeps carrying her while he's got like a consternated expression on his face. But like, this is absolutely her treating him like a slave, treating him like, well, you work for me, so you do whatever I need, whatever the situation calls for. But it's okay. She's about to get hers, because as soon as they get home, she collapses to her knees because their mansion is completely destroyed. Her servants emerge, seemingly unharmed, but then when Saucier asks what happens to her father, the woman just collapses in tears, and Saucier immediately realizes what that means, and she's immobilized. Laurent runs in, and right away we just see a doctor having already lain a sheet over Boss Heim. He's just already dead. We know he's dead. And this is what I mean when I said the show almost undercuts, in a way, its emotional moments. Like, we do see all of the emotions experienced by Saucier. We can feel for her, even though she's been like nothing but a brat this whole time. She's still losing her father. And even if the ways she's reacting are, annoying in their own way, it's still like natural. This is what you should expect. This is the horror of war. It's just being presented in such a matter-of-fact way, because the point of showing us this is not to get us emotional yet. It's another I told you so. I mean, Boss Heim was the most down for Gween's plan. He was the most blind of a follower. He was the most devoted to this idea that all he had to do was keep mining more materials and they'd keep making more planes and everything's going to be fine. And he's the first to go. So everything he was building, all the legacy he was trying to prepare, trying to set his family up straight and all that, all gone. None of that matters anymore. His family's lives are completely different now. Loran sees the body and he's desperately looking at the Gundam manual, wondering if it can do something. He's like, I don't even know what era it comes from, but surely it could do something. He's trying to get into its basic inputs. He's like, I can't believe it doesn't have voice command, and all he can do is move this pointer around the trackpad while Sochie comes in, and the voice actress really lays in on the shock and drama. It's a good delivery of this line because it really pulls you in out of Loran and into what's really going on here. Sochie losing her father. And then she slaps the shit out of Loran and is like, this is your fault because you were wasting time instead of saving him in the white doll. Which obviously is unreasonable, so he just doesn't say anything, and she goes back to crying next to him. She's got her hands clasped, and then she just starts screaming, and she runs outside, and Loran chases her, and he grabs her by the arm, and he's like, where do you think you're going? And she's like, I got to go to Gnosis. I got to tell Mom and my sister what happened. And Loran's like, look, you saw the fires in Gnosis, too, from the white doll. Like, this is everywhere. And so she's just like, well, then what should we do? And she tries to take off again. And this time he yanks her and he slaps her to the ground. And this is when Sochie realizes that she can't do anything. So she just gathers into a ball of screams. And Loran is looking on and he's pitying her. And then he's looking off into the sunset and he's just like crying. And he's like, is this really what Queen Diana wanted? And this is where we fully completed the circle I was mentioning earlier of subverting the romanticism of the plot so far. We had these two looking like, cute young mecha pilots in their cockpit together, landing on each other's nuts, and then now we're in a situation where they're slapping each other to the ground and crying. So back at the castle, Kihel is putting a wet cloth over her sleeping mother's face, and she's looking out over the rubble that's littering the bay under the dawn's light. Awesome shot. And there's a handful of ships and leg robots which are standing on the shore across the bay. So the robots and the ships all land, and their pilots are disembarking, and the mechanics are telling the woman pilot that they're amazed she even got off her second shot because her cover was so caked with nanoskin buildup that it should have been stuck. I'm guessing this is because of the beam that almost hit her. And she asks if it's wrecked, but then she gets interrupted and referred to as Ensign Poe. So now we finally learn her name, and she's told to see Lieutenant Phil. With an affirmative, she is lowered on her robot's hand to the ground, and she runs past some smaller two-seater ground robots which are being worked on and up this ramp to face the lieutenant, and she immediately is like, am I getting 10 years in prison? And he's like, you're actually looking at 15 or 17, but we're too short-handed to actually try you, and so we're going to give you a chance to redeem yourself. So this is another part of the chaos of war, is sometimes fuck-ups and bad people are still the only people who survived, and so you still need them around because that's what you've got. And the Moon people are short-staffed because they only came with a small force that was supposed to just be like, hey guys, here's our military might, now give over the stuff, not thinking they'd actually get fired on. So she gets assigned to help recapture the mobile suit, and she's all happy about it. Boss Heim gets buried in the front yard of his mansion by the family without Mom and Kihel around because apparently, given the time of year, summer, he needs to be buried quickly. This man in a black suit makes Sochie sign the death paperwork on behalf of the family, and, this is all just to be grim. Loran randomly sees Keith wandering in the background and wonders what is his dumbass doing here, while Sochie is tossing the first dirt onto her father's casket and just unraveling in tears. So Keith weirdly is kind of just watching and sneezes, and Loran's trying to help bury his boss and caretaker. They don't have a headstone ready, so the man in black just is like, find whatever you can put a date on and put it in the ground. And then Loran's like, Keith, this is not the best time. And Keith is like, well, I guess things are bad here in vicinity too. Suggesting he basically just ran from Gnosis to here across the field. Maybe he drove. Ensign Poe is then helmeting up and stating that if they spot the mustache, she's going to back off while the others surround and capture it. And then she leaps into a very different cockpit from the one the Gundam uses, and her huge goofy leg robot takes off running along the river, assumably from Gnosis to vicinity, with a smaller squad of robots behind it. Loran and Keith are also by the river now, soaking their feet and laying under a tree's shade at the same time to remind you it's hot outside, and Loran introduces Keith to the tablet, and they speculate if it could really go back 2,000 or 3,000 years. Keith also wonders that the moon race might have made it hundreds of years ago, too. He then remembers having seen 2 huge beams fired the night before and asks if that was Loran, and Loran says he only fired once and that it wasn't purposefully on their own Wadam. He then points out that he doesn't even know how to read the manual, and Keith concludes that the shock from the laser impact must have woken up the robot. Loran's wondering what will happen next, and Keith wishfully states that there's no way there's going to be a war. Loran points out the militia already fought, and Keith's like, no, they wouldn't do that again with the power difference. And he also asks Loran if he wants to dig out the flat and join Diana Counter, considering that the lives they had planned to continue just totally got upended now. Loran says he's not going back because their 2-year observation assignment is over and they were supposed to be allowed to live anywhere they wanted on Earth from this point on. Keith wonders if he can find somewhere to be a baker where there's no fighting, and then also wonders that they should go to the return ships and turn over the flat. Loran is like, what are you talking about? Are you just interested in saving yourself? Do you not care what happens to Earth? And Keith says, Loran, you're lucky because you have a mobile suit and you can run away whenever you want. And Loran's like, why would I run away? And Keith's like, take one look at what happened to Gnosis and you're going to want to, which is obviously him projecting. He wants to run away. So he basically accuses Loran of having no imagination about how bad things actually are in war. And then Loran's like, well, did Diana really want war? Then he notices a pendant on Keith's neck, which he calls him a cheater for bringing something from the moon against orders, even though he also brought a toy. And he finds in the locket a copy of a portrait of Queen Diana. And he's like, surely when Queen Diana comes, she'll calm everyone down. And Keith's like, Diana is not going to come here. So then Loran's like, she plans to bring the whole moon race here, so she will definitely come here. So Keith tosses in the pendant and then suits back up and he's like, I'm going to go check on my boss in Gnosis. And then he tells Loran, you should get good at using that mustached mobile suit so you can either rejoin Diana Counter or run away. Loran then arrives at the excavation site where Sid introduces him to the militia members. We see the assistant's cherry red hair as Loran reads a telegram from Gwyn drafting him into the militia service as the pilot of the white robot. So try to do something nice for these people and not fight against them, and now you're drafted to fight for them. He argues that they can't do this, and Sid only says that in order to negotiate with an unknown enemy, words need to be backed up with force. The assistant says that the arms on either side of the seat are part of the control system, which Loran confirms and introduces them to the instruction manual finally. The assistant points out that they had no idea the state of technology during the dark history, and Loran accidentally lowers a helmet onto his face, which makes Joseph fall over in shock. That's the assistant's name, and apparently he hurts himself badly enough he has to be carried off. Loran sees a radar in the helmet that detects mobile suits, and sure enough, the forces are approaching in the distance, so he wonders if he can start piloting. And the Turn-A achingly achieves balance on its mountain slope with its hand outstretched, and that's where the episode ends. So again, yeah, this was way more straightforward than the first two, especially considering it takes place entirely over the course of one night and morning, and it follows the characters, beat for beat through what they were doing through that scenario. It's much more about showing just how chaotic a situation can be when people are acting on different understandings of what's going on and creating all this unnecessary violence that could have easily been avoided with a couple of conversations. But, some people decided to act fast and the consequences were absolutely ridiculously massive. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from there and exploring who's to blame, who's going to be upset with whom, who's going to be trying to work things out, and all of that to unfold as this show goes on. These first 3 episodes definitely have the feel of not quite a 3-parter. It's a little bit of that. It's more like the first episode is its own thing and then the second and third feel like a 2-parter. But it definitely feels like we're out of the starting point of the show. The themes have been made apparent, the action is rolling, the characters are fleshed out, we know where we are and what the story is by this point. So I'm excited to continue it. I don't want to hold this extra long. If you listen to the first 2 episodes, you should be aware of things like my Samus vs. Samus audiobook series. You should be aware of the Slime Dolls channel where Gigadonk and I do gaming content. You should be aware of the Trixie the Golden Witch channel where members get access to philosophical vlogs and self-help stuff. You should know about the memberships on this channel that just get you access to these episodes a week early. Thank you once more to everybody who listens, everybody who comments. I will continue, reading through the comments and addressing things in these videos as they come out. The second episode is coming out publicly at the same time that this one's coming out for members, so I'll probably have a lot more comments from episode 2 to respond to by the time we get to episode 4. There'll always be a little bit of a delay in that sense. But I don't want to hold you anymore. I gotta edit this. Thanks for listening. I've been Nova, Anime Forever.